At dawn, Harbor Inspector Elena Marlow stood on Pier 9 with rain streaming down her face and a broken customs seal clenched in her hand. Inside the container behind her, Dante Caruso's men found $50 million in unregistered diamonds, and surveillance footage showed Elena cutting the lock herself. Before hundreds of dock workers, the cold Italian-American Mafia boss branded the beautiful, plus-size inspector a smuggler and ordered her detained. By noon, federal agents would raid every Caruso vessel in the harbor. Yet Elena insisted the diamonds were bait and begged Dante to keep his ships docked. He refused. Minutes later, all 12 vessels disappeared from their berths without alarms, engine noise, or a single crew departure recorded. The impossible part was that Elena's inspection tablet had authorized every ship's release while it lay shattered beneath Dante's shoe. Then a harbor radio crackled with her voice, warning that one vanished vessel was returning with something aboard powerful enough to destroy the entire waterfront. The radio went silent, leaving only the rain hammering the steel roof of Pier 9. Elena Marlow stood between two Caruso guards, her wrists restrained in front of her. Her navy waterproof inspection coat clung to her, unmistakably large. Soft frame, while rainwater ran from her auburn hair onto the broken customs seal, still trapped in her right hand. At 31, she had learned to endure dockworkers underestimating her. She had never learned how to endure Dante looking at her as though every hour of trust between them had been counterfeit. A radar operator shouted from the harbor station. Vessel entering the East Channel. No response to hails. Dante turned toward the rain-obscured water. Tall and broad-shouldered beneath a charcoal overcoat, the 40-year-old Italian-American boss remained unnervingly still. Black and gray tattoos climbed his neck above his open collar and covered the backs of the hands hanging at his sides. "Which vessel?" he asked. "The Marinus Grace, one of the 12 missing ships." Victor Sloan, Caruso Maritime's chief operating officer, stepped beside Dante. "The Coast Guard can intercept it." "No, they can't," Elena said. Victor glanced at her with practiced contempt. "The Smuggler has another warning. The ship is using HarborLink's automated approach corridor. Any patrol boat entering that lane will receive false collision data and be diverted." Dante's jaw tightened. "How do you know? Because I rejected that system 6 months ago." Victor installed it anyway. All eyes moved to the chief operating officer. Victor did not flinch. "You rejected one software revision. The defects were corrected. Then explain how an unmanned ship passed the outer barrier." A horn sounded through the rain, one long blast, followed by 2 short ones. Elena's face drained of color. "That is a distress signal," she said. "It is commanding Pier 9 to clear a berth." The radar operator raised his voice 7 minutes to impact. Dante looked at the open container behind Elena. Diamonds glittered beneath portable work lights, each stone supporting the accusation against her. Nearby, the remains of her shattered inspection tablet lay in a shallow puddle. "Stop the ship," he ordered. The operator's fingers raced across his console. Remote shutdown rejected. Elena pulled against the guards. "Deploy the eastern arresting boom." It was decommissioned. Victor said, "No. I forced the port to retain its manual hydraulics after your company stopped funding the electronic controls." She looked directly at Dante. "The activation wheel is inside the red maintenance cabinet, beside berth 11. Ruth Alvarez inspected it with me on Tuesday. Send her." Victor moved closer to Dante. She could be guiding the ship exactly where her partners want it. Elena opened her fist. The severed customs seal had cut a thin red line across her palm. If I wanted that vessel to reach this pier, I would let you keep arguing for 2 seconds. Dante's expression revealed nothing. Then he raised one tattooed hand. Send Alvarez. The dockmaster sprinted through the rain with 2 mechanics. 90 seconds later, a heavy barrier began rising from the black water across the eastern approach. The Mariner's Grace emerged from the fog without navigation lights. No one stood on its bridge. Its bow drove into the reinforced boom, dragging the barrier nearly 40 feet before the hydraulic anchors held. The vessel stopped less than 60 yards from Pier 9. A metallic door opened along its cargo deck. Rows of secured chemical containers stood inside, wired to an unfamiliar ignition assembly. No flames appeared, but every worker understood what one spark could do. Dante faced Elena again. Something uncertain moved behind his cold eyes, but it disappeared when Victor handed him a printed transfer record bearing Elena's authorization code and signature. The federal task force needs a named suspect before noon, Victor said. If we cooperate now, they may separate her operation from the Caruso companies. Elena shook her head. Once you submit that accusation, whoever hijacked your fleet will know you chose the evidence they manufactured. Dante accepted the document. For the first time, fear broke through Elena's composure. Dante. He signed the formal complaint and handed it back to Victor. A signal light flashed aboard the arrested vessel. The harbor station's main screen turned black, then displayed a white message. 1 ship recovered. 11 targets remain. The message remained on the screen for 11 seconds before the harbor station lost power. Emergency lamps washed Pier 9 in dull red. Workers began running, but Elena raised her restrained hands and shouted above the rain. Nobody crosses the yellow crane line. If those containers shift, the arresting boom becomes the safest place on this pier. Several men stopped without waiting for Dante's approval. They knew Elena's voice. She had spent 3 years finding cracked ladders, falsified weights, and faulty breathing masks that executives dismissed until she made them listen. Dante noticed the obedience. What do you need? The paper hazardous material manifest from the customs box. Not the digital copy. Ruth Alvarez retrieved a waterproof binder from a cabinet beside the station. She was 58, compact, gray-haired, and furious enough to ignore Victor when he tried to take it from her. She placed the binder on a steel drum and turned pages while Elena read over her shoulder. The returning ship was supposed to be empty, Ruth said. It was empty at 11 last night. Elena found the vessel's final signed inspection. These containers were loaded after the Mariner's Grace entered Caruso's secured basin. Victor folded his arms. By someone using her authorization, Elena ignored him. The printed codes identified the material as industrial oxidizer, dangerous but stable if kept separated from fuel and electrical current. She directed the dock crew to shut down 3 local feeders, close the storm drains, and position unmanned fire monitors toward the ship. Dante repeated every instruction as an order, giving her knowledge the authority his men required. The arrangement was painfully familiar. Elena had warned. Dante had decided. Everyone had pretended his decision began the process. A chemical response unit called from outside the security gate. Its commander refused to enter, while HarborLink showed the Mariner's Grace moving at 8 knots through the same lane where the ship sat trapped. The network is feeding them a ghost position, Elena said. Use the Western Service Road and guide them by radio. Victor held up a phone. All port frequencies are contaminated. Elena nodded toward the old signal shed. There's a copper field line from the shed to the outer gate. It predates Harbor Link. Dante sent Ruth. Within 4 minutes, the response trucks entered without relying on a single compromised screen. Only then did he look at Elena's bleeding palm. "Release one wrist," he told the guards. Victor objected. "She is evidence and a flight risk." Dante's eyes moved to him. Victor fell silent. One cuff opened. Elena took a handkerchief from her coat and wrapped the shallow cut. From the same pocket, she removed a narrow waterproof notebook held together with a faded blue band. Victor reached for it. "What is that?" "My seal ledger. Every high-risk customs seal Elena inspected was recorded twice, once in the port system and once in her own handwriting. Beside each number, she pressed a tiny dot of clear marine lacquer onto the paper and onto the metal seal. Under ultraviolet light, the two marks fluoresced the same shade. The habit had once earned her a written reprimand for wasting time. It had also exposed 4 cargo substitutions. She opened the book to the final page, seal B719044. Verified at 4:42 this morning, intact. Dante looked toward the severed seal. Elena opened her hand, the same number, the same lacquer mark. "I cut the genuine seal because the container's weight had increased by 412 pounds after inspection. And then you found diamonds," Victor said. "No, your men arrived before I could look inside." Victor produced a clear evidence pouch. "Give me the seal." Elena closed her fingers around it. "Chain of custody requires a port witness." Ruth stepped forward. "I'll witness." Victor's mouth hardened, but he documented the time 6:24 a.m. and sealed the metal fragment in the pouch while Ruth signed across the adhesive edge. An alarm sounded from the powerless radar console. One backup display had restarted on an isolated battery. It showed 11 red markers scattered beyond the harbor. Dante bent over the screen. "Are those my ships?" "They want you to think so," Elena said. "A transponder reports what it is told to report." She tapped one marker supposedly traveling south at 23 knots. "The Bellezza has a damaged port propeller. I grounded her yesterday. She cannot make more than 6 knots without tearing the shaft apart." Dante stared at the impossible speed. His fleet had depended on Elena's refusal to sign a false repair certificate, and he had cursed her for the delay less than 24 hours ago. Victor quietly took possession of the sealed evidence pouch. "Move her to the security annex," Dante ordered. "Give her access to the isolated records. 20 minutes. Elena searched his face. "And if I prove your report was wrong?" Rain struck the steel between them. "Then I will find out who taught my ships to lie." The security annex stood 200 yards inland, connected to Pier 9 by a covered freight passage. By 6:31 a.m., Elena sat at an isolated terminal with one wrist still cuffed to a steel chair. Her wet coat hung over the back, leaving her in a dark teal blouse, black work trousers, and steel-toed boots. Dante stood behind her. Victor remained by the door with the evidence pouch inside his leather case. The annex received a mirror of port traffic every 30 seconds. Unlike Harbor Link, the mirror could display records but could not issue commands. Elena opened the authorization history for her shattered tablet. Her genuine clearance at 5:46 had been a hold order on the diamond container. At 5:58, a security camera showed Dante crushing the tablet beneath his shoe. At 6:12, the destroyed device authorized all 12 Caruso ships to depart. Elena leaned back. "There is your first impossibility." Victor approached the screen. A delayed transmission. A delayed transmission keeps its creation time. This token was created at 6:12. Dante's gaze settled on the chief operating officer. Can a token be forged? Not without her private key, Victor said. Elena opened the routing details. The command had not entered through the public port network. It had originated inside Caruso Maritime S maintenance subnet, passed through HarborLink, and borrowed the identity of her tablet only at the final gate. Who controls that subnet? Dante asked. My department, Victor replied, along with 12 engineers and 3 outside contractors. Elena searched the maintenance registry. Each missing vessel had received an identical navigation patch at 2:40 that morning. The certificate belonged to North Star Marine Systems, a contractor Elena had never approved. Victor said North Star updated fuel monitoring software. Nothing related to navigation. Then why did its certificate enter the navigation controller? He offered no answer. Elena requested the original patch description. The screen displayed a notice. File removed by administrator at 6:18 a.m., 4 minutes after the false departure tokens. From the radio room beyond the glass, a dispatcher called that another Caruso vessel had appeared near the airport fuel pier. Its transponder identified it as the grounded Bellezza. That marker is bait, Elena said. Call the airport pier on the copper line and ask what they can physically see. Victor checked his watch. We do not have time for another antique solution. Dant gave the order anyway. Ruth's voice returned through the field. Telephone. No ship. Clear water. Elena turned back to the terminal. The false positions are drawing emergency boats away from the real fleet. Where are the real ships? Dante asked. She opened the independent tide gauge records. Every large vessel displaced water differently when leaving the secured basin. The computerized report showed a flat surface all night, but the mechanical pressure gauges had registered 12 separate wakes between 2:47 and 4:36 a.m. They did not vanish at dawn, Elena said. They were moved one at a time during the storm, using their quiet electric harbor drives. HarborLink looped old camera images over the empty berths until the system went dark. Dant's eyes narrowed. Uncrewed? The maintenance patch can operate the electric drives inside restricted water. It cannot navigate safely offshore. Whoever took them must still be controlling them from somewhere within the harbor network. Elena tried to export the pressure records to a protected Port Authority archive. The request rerouted to an approval screen bearing the name of Martin Keene, her own regional supervisor. A second later, the file disappeared. She stared at the empty folder. Martin is either compromised or locked out, she said. My official channels are no longer safe. The annex lights flickered. Across the terminal, 11 remote sessions began opening against the Caruso maintenance server. Elena saw what was happening before the system sounded an alarm. They are issuing new routes. Shut it down, Dante ordered. Victor blocked her path to the equipment rack. If we disconnect the server, we destroy our only view of the ships. It is not a view. It is the steering wheel. Elena demanded the key to the rack. Victor claimed it had been misplaced. The remote sessions reached 60%. She lifted the steel chair with her restrained arm, just enough to drag it to the wall, seized a red emergency lever, and pulled. A mechanical release opened the equipment cage. Before either guard understood, she reached inside and removed the fist-sized signing module that allowed HarborLink to accept Caruso maintenance commands. Every screen went black. Victor raised his phone and filmed her holding the module. She just destroyed the network. I severed the command path, Elena said. The annex doors burst open. Federal agents entered with weapons drawn, nearly 3 hours ahead of the expected raid. Their leader, Special Agent Lee Price, saw Elena cuffed beside the disabled rack, the signing module in her hand, and Victor's recording already playing on his phone. Price ordered Elena to drop it. Elena placed the module on the floor. Dante could have explained instead. He looked at the diamonds on the evidence photographs, the transfer record bearing Elena's signature, and the machine she had torn from his server. She acted without my authorization, he said. The word struck harder than the cuff closing around Elena's free wrist. Then every dead monitor in the annex illuminated at once. A live image showed 11 Caruso captains imprisoned together inside an unknown cargo hold. The captains sat on the floor with their wrists bound, each wearing the clothes in which he had reported for a mandatory 1 a.m. safety briefing. A bulkhead behind them carried no vessel name, only a stripe of faded green paint. A distorted voice spoke over the image. At noon, the federal government takes the Caruso fleet. At 12:01, the captains go down with it. The feed ended. Dante reached for the signing module, but Agent Price stepped between him and the floor. Nobody touches that device. She assigned one agent to photograph it in place and another to seal it in a radio frequency shielded box. Elena watched the process closely. "Record the serial number," she said. Price looked at her. "You are in no position to give instructions. If that module is switched, you will lose the only object linking the false commands to this room." Victor laughed once. She is already preparing her defense. Price read Elena her rights. The accusation now included smuggling, unlawful interference with navigation systems, and conspiracy to seize federally regulated vessels. Victor gave the agents his video. Martin Keene, speaking through Price's phone, confirmed that Elena had no authority to remove Caruso's signing module. An agent sealed Elena's waterproof notebook with her other personal effects for transport. The false case was no longer a pile of suspicious records. It had a witness, a supervisor, a video, and a true act stripped of its reason. Elena faced Dante while Price secured her cuffs to a transport belt. The green stripe belongs to the old Provident class. Only 2 of your ships still have it below deck. Dante knew the answer. The Santa Lucia and the Belladonna. Check which captain is missing from the video. He counted. Pietro Vanni, captain of the Santa Lucia, was not among the prisoners. Victor answered before anyone asked. Vanni was scheduled off duty. Elena stared at him. The captain's schedule had not been visible on the screen. Dante noticed, but Price was already guiding Elena toward the door. "Wait," he said. Hope rose in Elena's eyes despite everything. Dante removed his overcoat and placed it over the signing module's evidence box to shield it from rain as agents carried it outside. Then he stepped away from her. "My attorney will cooperate with the task force," he told Price. The hope vanished. Elena did not ask him again. At 9:26 a.m., she was placed in the rear of a federal transport van, with Price beside her and 2 agents in front. The rain had weakened, but standing water slowed traffic along the restricted service road. Price kept the evidence box between her boots. "You came early," Elena said. "We received confirmation that the fleet was leaving the harbor." "From whom?" Price did not answer. The van passed beneath a rail bridge half a mile from pier. 9. A maintenance truck blocked the lane ahead. The driver braked. 2 men in reflective port jackets approached. waving them toward a detour. Elena saw their boots before she saw their faces. New rubber soles, no salt stains, no steel caps. Men who worked these roads did not dress from a package. "Reverse," she said. The first suppressed shot broke the windshield. The driver slumped over the wheel. Price pushed Elena down as the second agent tried to return fire. The van rolled backward, struck the bridge barrier, and tipped onto its right side. Metal screamed. Elena's left shoulder slammed into the wall. The evidence box struck Price above the temple, leaving her dazed and bleeding. One attacker pulled at the rear doors. Elena could not reach the agent's weapon, and with both hands cuffed to her waist, she could not force the door. She hooked one boot beneath the van's emergency glass hammer, dragged it close, and closed both hands around it. The side window above her was designed as a full-width evacuation panel. 3 blows fractured a corner. She kicked the weakened glass outward, widening the opening rather than trying to squeeze through jagged edges. The rear door opened as Elena pushed Price through the window onto the wet grass. She followed with painful care, turning sideways and using the broad frame of the overturned van to shield them. Her shoulder burned and glass cut her trouser leg, but she remained on her feet. The attackers expected her to run toward the road. Elena dragged Price down the embankment instead. A storm culvert passed beneath the railway, tall and wide enough for maintenance crews. She had inspected its floodgate 3 weeks earlier. They entered seconds before bullets struck the concrete mouth. Elena pulled the manual gate release. A steel grate dropped behind them, separating the culvert from the road. It would not stop the attackers for long, but it forced them to find cutting equipment. Price struggled to focus. "Why save me?" "Because you logged that Module S serial number." The evidence box was gone, left inside the van. Elena removed Price's phone, called emergency dispatch, reported the injured agents, and gave the exact culvert entrance. Before ending the call, she heard a police transmission describing her as armed and fleeing. Someone had issued the alert before the ambush was over. Price understood it too. "My task force is compromised. So is my port." Sirens approached from the east. Men with cutting tools approached from the west. Elena guided Price through the culvert to a disused pump station beyond the railway. She left the phone beside an active drainage sensor so responders could find the injured agent, then continued alone toward the abandoned East Boston dry docks. At 10:04 a.m., Victor showed Dante a traffic camera image of Elena walking away from the wreck. "She arranged her own escape," he said. Dante watched the loop twice. It did not show Elena pulling Price from the van. It did not show the attackers. It showed only the woman he had accused disappearing into the gray morning. At noon, federal officers seized Caruso Maritime S accounts, terminals, and remaining cargo. Elena Marlow had vanished, so had the sealed fragment bearing her lacquer mark. By 12:30 p.m., Pier 9 belonged to federal evidence teams. Dante watched from the second floor of a leased warehouse across the basin as agents photographed his offices and sealed the gates of the company his father had built. Victor stood at a folding table, speaking with attorneys and creditors. He moved with efficient grief, presenting himself as the man preserving what remained. At 1, he announced that Meridian Harbor Recovery Fund had offered emergency financing if Dante surrendered operational control before the receivership hearing the following morning. The speed of the offer bothered Dante. So did the empty chair where Elena should have been telling everyone why their solution was unsafe. He opened the Beleza S repair file. Elena's refusal certificate was clipped to the first page in her precise handwriting. She had grounded a profitable ship despite weeks of pressure because a damaged propeller could kill a crew. Yet the government expected him to believe that the same woman had sent 12 ships into a storm for money. That was the first contradiction. Character. Dante summoned Ruth to the warehouse. She arrived at 1:22, still wearing her orange dockmasteress coat and carrying a copy of Elena's paper manifest. "Where is the seal?" he asked. Victor took the evidence pouch at 6:24. "I signed across the adhesive." Dante called Victor away from the attorneys. "Federal agents collected it," Victor said. "Which agent?" "I did not record a badge number during an emergency." Ruth's expression sharpened. "Chain of custody requires one." Victor looked at her as if she were an inconvenience. Then perhaps the inspector who created this disaster should have followed her own rules. After he returned to the attorneys, Dante asked his security chief, Gabriel Russo, for the Annex's isolated camera feed. Gabriel found one surviving recording stored locally. It showed Elena's tablet breaking at 5:58. A second camera captured the maintenance server clock when the false departure authorization appeared at 6:12. A dead machine could not create a new encrypted command 14 minutes after its destruction. That was the second contradiction. Technology. Dante requested the raw footage from Elena's transport route. Victor said the federal task force had restricted access. Dante did not argue. Instead, he told Victor privately that a harbor pilot had reported the missing Santa Lucia near Quarry Channel. The report was false. At 2:07, Gabriel observed two men in port jackets leaving a vehicle near Quarry Channel. One carried a compact directional antenna. Their van was registered to a North Star Marine Systems subcontractor. Only Victor had received the false location. That was the third contradiction. Betrayal. Dante entered the conference room at 2:20 and closed the door behind him. Victor looked up from Meridian's financing papers. "You knew, Pietro, Vanni was missing before Elena identified him," Dante said. "I know, my captains. You also knew where," I said. The Santa Lucia had been seen. Victor's face remained composed, but his right thumb stopped moving across his phone. Dante placed one tattooed hand flat on the table. "If you warn anyone that I am looking for Elena, I will know you signed the complaint." The words found their mark. Victor leaned closer. "Whatever doubts you have now, the world watched you call her a smuggler. If you reverse yourself without proof, you lose the family council, the legitimate company, and every captain still alive." Dante straightened. "Then I will bring proof." He left Victor under Gabriel's observation and followed Ruth to the signal shed. Elena's waterproof notebook had been photographed before Victor took the seal, and Ruth had retained the image on an old inspection camera that never connected to Harbor Link. The last page contained more than the seal number. In the margin, Elena had drawn 3 short lines beneath the initials EBD. "East Boston Dry Dock," Ruth said. 3 means pump station. 3. Inspectors mark fallback meeting places during network outages. Dante studied the notation. Would she go there? Only if every official channel had failed. At 3:05, hospital dispatch confirmed that Agent Price had been found alive at a disused pump station. She had a concussion and a scalp wound, but had told responders that Elena saved her. Before she could make a formal statement, Federal Internal Affairs isolated her from the task force. Victor's edited traffic footage had omitted the rescue. Dante felt the shape of his mistake with brutal clarity. He had not merely doubted Elena, he had given the conspiracy her name, his authority, and a public accusation no private apology could erase. He changed into black work clothes and a waterproof field jacket at the warehouse, leaving his suit and overcoat behind. Gabriel drove him and Ruth through the Sumner Tunnel at 4:10. Traffic and flood closures stretched the trip to 40 minutes. They parked 2 blocks from the abandoned dry dock and continued on foot. Beneath a clearing sky, the tide was low. Rusted cranes cast long shadows over cracked concrete. Pump Station 3 stood beside an empty repair basin, its windows boarded and its side door secured from within. Dante approached alone. Elena, no answer. He set his pistol on the ground and stepped away from it. Price is alive, he said. I know you saved her. A flare ignited behind him, bathing the dock in red. Elena stood on an elevated service platform, her injured left arm held close to her body in her right hand. She aimed a marine flare launcher at a line of fuel-soaked rope running beneath Dante's parked escape route. You came through the route only Victor knew, she said. So either you finally believe me, or you brought him exactly where he wanted to go. Across the basin, an engine started in the gathering dark. Headlights swept across the dry dock. Elena lowered the flare launcher just enough to see a white North Star service van entering through the western gate. The men inside had not followed Dante's car. They had been waiting. Victor expected me to lead him to you, Dante said. Then stop. Standing in the open, the first shot struck the railing below Elena's platform. Dante seized his pistol and moved behind a concrete pump housing. Elena fired the flare into the soaked rope. Flame raced along the ground, igniting a narrow barrier across the van's path. The driver braked before crossing it. Elena descended the platform slowly, protecting her left shoulder. Dante covered the stairs until she reached the bottom. Can you run? He asked. Not far. He did not tell her he would carry her. He looked at the width of the basin, the locked gate behind the attackers, and the old control booth 20 yards away. What still works here? The question mattered. He was asking for her judgment, not waiting to claim it as his own. The drainage pumps, maybe the caisson gate, they moved together behind a row of rusted tool cabinets. Dante fired twice at the concrete beside the advancing men, forcing them into cover. Elena reached the control booth and found its breaker panel. The electronic controls were dead, but the manual starters remained labeled with inspection dates. Her own initials appeared beside the last test. She engaged Pump 2 in reverse. Seawater surged through an intake channel and flooded the sunken service road beneath the van. The vehicle dropped axle-deep into the trench. One attacker abandoned it carrying a black equipment case. The other tried to reach the pedestrian gate. Gabriel emerged from behind a storage building and blocked him. Ruth struck the emergency gate release, trapping both men inside the dry dock perimeter. The man with the case fired toward Ruth. Dante stepped between them. The bullet grazed the outside of his right forearm before Gabriel forced the shooter to the ground. The second attacker escaped over a low seawall and disappeared among the pilings. For a moment, Elena stared at the blood darkening Dante's sleeve. It is a graze, he said. I did not ask, but she took a clean pressure bandage from the control booth and handed it to him. Gabriel restrained the captured attacker with industrial ties. The man carried no identification. His case held a directional antenna, a North Star maintenance receiver, and a tablet displaying 11 numbered vessel channels. It did not contain the encryption key needed to issue commands. Victor kept the key, Elena said. He sends instructions. These teams only maintain contact. Dante looked at the channel list. Can this tell us where the ships are? Not directly. The receiver measures signal strength, not position. She pointed toward a concrete building at the end of the pier, but the old tide station recorded underwater sound before HarborLink existed. If its storage survived, we can reconstruct their departure directions. Dante told Gabriel to hold the prisoner in the locked control booth and contact Agent Price through hospital internal affairs, not the compromised task force. Ruth remained with him. Dante and Elena walked the length of the basin as evening settled over the harbor. Inside the tide station, dust covered a bank of analog instruments and a digital recorder installed during a conservation project. Elena had to brace her injured arm while opening the housing. Dante reached past her, then stopped. "Tell me what to move." She directed him to disconnect the external network cable. Before restoring local power, the recorder came alive without broadcasting their location. 12 low, distinct propulsion signatures appeared between 2:47 and 4:36 a.m., matching the mechanical pressure records Elena had seen before they were erased. Each vessel had left the basin under quiet electric power, then paused near one of 4 North Star service buoys. Ruth joined them by field telephone and authenticated the recorder S-clock against the tide station. S-sealed mechanical chronometer. She photographed the display and began a handwritten custody log. This was proof that the official Dawn disappearance had been staged, but it did not identify the person controlling the ships. Elena opened the receiver captured from the van and compared its timing pulses with the underwater recordings. Every vessel had received a synchronization command 7 seconds before moving. The pulse carried a certificate serial number, NES 4408. Dante recognized it. Victor presented that certificate to the Caruso board when North Star received the maintenance contract. A corporate certificate proves access, not the individual who used it. He watched her save 2 read-only copies of the tide data onto sealed optical discs, one for Ruth and one for Price. She did not pretend that evidence became strong merely because it favored her. "You could have let the Mariner's Grace hit my pier," he said. "There were 200 workers on it. You could have left Price in that van." She logged the module. "You always have a professional reason." Elena faced him. "Would an emotional one make what you did easier to forgive?" His expression remained controlled, but regret tightened the corners of his eyes. "No." Ruth secured the disc envelope with numbered evidence tape while Elena signed the custody line. The pressure of the pen reopened the cut in Elena's palm slightly. Dante took out a clean handkerchief. He offered it rather than touching her. After a long hesitation, Elena accepted. The field telephone rang. Ruth answered, listened, then handed the receiver to Elena. "Agent." Price's voice was weak but clear. Internal Affairs traced Meridian Harbor Recovery Fund. It purchased Caruso Maritime S default insurance 6 weeks ago. If the fleet is federally seized or destroyed, Meridian receives the terminals, the routes, and the insurance payout. "Who controls Meridian?" Elena asked. "The ownership is hidden behind 3 trusts, but the escrow agreement has one operational beneficiary." Price took a breath. Victor Sloan. Dant closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, Elena was still watching him. "Believing me now does not undo. Believing him then," she said. "I know outside," the captured North Star receiver activated on its own. 11 channels changed course simultaneously. Their new destination was the heart of Boston Harbor. The receiver's map placed the 11 vessels in a wide arc beyond the inner harbor islands. None was moving fast enough to reach downtown. Before midnight, they were being positioned, not launched. Elena studied the headings. Victor wants the fleet visible when the receivership hearing begins. He needs the government to believe he can recover what you cannot. The hearing was scheduled for 10 the next morning at the Federal Custom House. Meridian S. emergency financing petition could not be postponed without pushing Caruso Maritime into automatic default. If Dante failed to appear, Victor could request temporary control uncontested. "Then the hearing continues," Dante said. Elena looked at him. "Even with 11 ships aimed toward the city?" "Especially then." He built his plan around that room. They left the captured receiver powered inside the shielded tide station and gave Ruth custody of both data disks. Gabriel transferred the prisoner to federal internal affairs officers sent by Price. Because the task force remained compromised, the arrest was recorded under seal. At 8:40 p.m., they moved to the apartment above Ruth S. Marine Supply Store in Chelsea. Elena cleaned the glass cuts on her lower leg and changed into spare inspection. Clothes she kept in Ruth S. locker. A charcoal sweater, dark utility pants, and weatherproof boots. Ruth secured her bruised shoulder in a proper sling. Dante cleaned the graze along his right forearm and replaced the blood-stained field jacket with a midnight blue work coat borrowed from Gabriel. They gathered around Ruth S. kitchen table. Level 1 evidence lay in 2 envelopes, the tide station recording and mechanical pressure data, proving that the fleet had left hours before Elena's supposed authorization. Level 2 connected the operation to Victor. The North Star receiver, certificate ends 4408. The maintenance subnet and Meridian S escrow agreement, naming him as beneficiary. What they lacked was proof that Victor had knowingly issued the commands and arranged the frame. "The signing key is the missing link," Elena said. HarborLink requires the physical North Star token to authorize fleet-wide maintenance movement. A password is not enough. Ruth remembered seeing a black metal token attached to Victor's watch chain during software tests. Dante had seen it too. Victor carried it because remote maintenance sessions expired whenever the token left the Port S secure geographic zone. That requirement was his fatal constraint. He could hide ownership behind trusts and blame engineers for individual commands. But he could not regain control of all 11 ships without bringing the physical key inside the harbor network. Price joined by an encrypted hospital call. A Coast Guard cyber examiner had recovered a backup navigation recorder from the arrested mariner S. Grace after the chemical containers were stabilized. Its protected log contained the North Star certificate, but the final user field had been erased. "Let Victor believe it was not erased," Elena said. She designed 3 versions of the same false report. In the version sent to Martin Keene, the recorder had preserved the operator's biometric signature. In the version sent through a Caruso attorney, it had preserved a voice print. In the version shared with Meridian S Council, it had preserved the physical token S complete serial number. Only the 3rd detail was technically plausible enough to alarm Victor. Dante studied her. "You expect him to alter the recorder?" No, he cannot reach it. I expect him to use the key tomorrow and overwrite the Fleet's remote audit trail before the examiner compares it with the recorder. Price arranged for the recovered unit to be displayed as evidence at the hearing. A passive Coast Guard recorder would monitor the isolated maintenance network from the custom house. Any new fleet-wide command would capture the physical token's serial and precise network location without allowing the command to reach the ships. And if he does nothing? Dante asked. Then Meridian cannot demonstrate control, the fleet remains missing, and his petition fails. For the first time, they had forced Victor into a choice that harmed him either way. Dante called his family council at 10:15. He told them Elena was alive and that his accusation had been premature. Several captains' relatives demanded that he surrender her. Dante refused. "She is not under my protection," he said. "She is leading the recovery." Elena heard the distinction after the call. He placed the signed federal complaint on the table. "Tomorrow I retract this publicly. Not before Victor commits himself," she said. "You are asking me to let the room. Believe I still condemn you. I am asking whether you can follow my strategy when it costs you." His eyes held hers. "Yes." At 11:02, Martin Keene forwarded the biometric version of the false report to an unknown number. Meridian's counsel forwarded the token serial version 30 seconds later. Victor received both, confirming 2 compromised channels. He responded by filing an emergency declaration accusing Elena of taking the captains hostage and manipulating Dante through threats. The declaration included a photograph taken outside the Chelsea store less than 10 minutes earlier. They evacuated immediately. Gabriel drove Ruth and the evidence toward the federal courthouse under internal affairs escort. Dante and Elena took a separate vehicle south, then doubled back through the tunnel to break surveillance. They reached a secure Coast Guard office near the custom house at 1:10 a.m. on a harbor camera, isolated from Harbor Link. The Belladonna emerged from the outer darkness. Its cargo doors opened as it approached the city. The 11 captive captains were visible inside. Standing behind them, with a pistol, was Pietro Vanni, the one captain missing from Victor's original video. Vanni's broadcast reached the Coast Guard office at 1:14 a.m. "The Belladonna is anchored above the main harbor tunnel," he said. "Any boarding attempt, signal interference, or delay to the receivership hearing will endanger the captains and close this harbor for years." The camera shifted toward secured chemical drums along the cargo wall. Whether the threat could destroy the tunnel was uncertain. Whether it could kill the prisoners was not. Vanni demanded that the hearing proceed at 10, and that Victor receive temporary control of Caruso Maritime. At 10:30, the Belladonna would accept one fleet-wide recall command. If the command did not arrive, Vanni claimed the ship's emergency system would activate. Victor had created a public reason the hearing could not be postponed and a visible crisis only he appeared able to solve. Elena watched the Belladonna's movements on an isolated Coast Guard camera. The vessel held position without correcting for wind or current until each quarter hour, when its electric drives engaged for exactly 20 seconds. "Pre-programmed station keeping," she said. "Vanni is not actively steering." Victor saved the physical token for the hearing. The Coast Guard could not board before the deadline without risking the hostages. Instead, rescue boats waited beyond the exclusion zone while Price coordinated with internal affairs from her hospital room. At 3 a.m., Elena reviewed the Custom House network plan with Coast Guard examiner Owen Park. The passive recorder would sit inside the evidence display beside the recovered Mariner S. Grace unit. Any command sent from the hearing room would be captured before HarborLink rejected it. "One recorder is not enough," Elena said. She asked Park to run an independent copper line from the maintenance switch to an unused fire telegraph circuit in the basement. The old circuit could carry timing pulses to a mechanical chart recorder without touching the building's network. Park sealed the paper roll, documented its blank starting condition, and placed a federal evidence officer beside it. At 6:30, Elena slept for 40 minutes in a Coast Guard conference room. Afterward, Price's colleague delivered professional clothes from Elena's apartment, a deep burgundy wrap dress that followed her full figure without restricting her movement, a black wool coat and low leather boots. The sling remained beneath the coat until they entered the building. Dante changed into a tailored midnight blue suit and open-collar black shirt. His bandaged forearm rested beneath the sleeve. His neck and hand tattoos remained visible. At 9:42, they entered the Custom House through separate secured doors. The hearing chamber was crowded with federal officials, creditors, port employees, reporters, and relatives of the captive captains. Victor sat at Meridian S table in a gray suit, a black metal token hanging from his watch chain. Martin Keene occupied a seat behind the government attorneys. Elena entered under guard. Anger traveled through the room. People who had worked beside her avoided her eyes. A reporter called her the Harbor Smuggler Victor. S emergency declaration appeared on every press screen, accompanied by Dante's signed complaint. Dante did not look at her. The judge began at 10. Victor testified that he had discovered Elena's unauthorized access, preserved the company's records, and negotiated the only financing capable of saving the fleet. Meridian S counsel introduced the severed customs seal. Elena saw immediately that it was not the fragment she had surrendered. The lacquer dot was missing. Ruth rose from the gallery. "That evidence pouch is not the one I signed." Martin produced a custody form claiming Ruth's signature had been placed on a temporary bag before federal repackaging. The explanation was false, but plausible enough to prevent an immediate ruling. Then Victor played his video of Elena removing the signing module. He presented a financial record showing a deposit of $200,000 into an account bearing her name. Elena had never seen the account, yet its registration included her address and social security number. The judge turned to Dante. "Mr. Caruso, do you maintain the allegation in your signed complaint?" This was the moment Elena's strategy required him to endure. Dante stood. His face remained cold, his hands motionless at his sides. "At the time I signed it, I believed Elena Marlow had betrayed my company. Do you offer evidence today that she did not?" He looked at her at last. "No evidence this court has admitted." A murmur passed through the chamber. To everyone except Elena, it sounded like a second condemnation. Victor touched the token on his watch chain. At 10:17, the harbor screens showed 10 missing ships emerging from behind the islands and forming an orderly line toward their former berths. The Belladonna remained above the tunnel with the captains. The passive Coast Guard recorder captured the recall command. Examiner Park opened the result and went still. The command carried Elena's destroyed tablet identity. Victor had used the physical North Star token to wrap the live instruction inside her stolen credentials. The primary recorder connected through a switch Martin had accessed before the hearing, identified Elena as the operator. Meridian-S counsel requested immediate control. The judge granted Victor temporary receivership for 72 hours, reasoning that he alone had demonstrated an ability to recall the fleet and protect the harbor. Federal marshals moved to take Elena. Dante remained at his table, apparently defeated by his own complaint. Victor passed close enough to speak without turning his head. "You nearly understood the system. That is why I chose you." Elena's expression did not change. "The captains are still on the Belladonna," she said. "Temporary control becomes permanent when Dante dies rescuing them." The clock reached 10:25. Victor stepped before the cameras and announced that he would transmit the final safety command in 5 minutes. Behind him, harbor screens showed the 10 recovered ships settling into their berths. The Belladonna's broadcast returned. Vani forced one captive captain to read a countdown. As the man reached 4 minutes, Elena saw a detail in the live image that Victor had overlooked. The green stripe behind the prisoners was interrupted by a rectangular patch of fresh paint. She turned toward Dante. "They are not on the Belladonna," she said loudly. "That hold belongs to the Santa Lucia." Victor's hand froze over the token. At that moment, the mechanical chart recorder in the custom house basement began drawing the true signature of his command. Elena faced the judge. "Order Pier 4 locked down. The Santa Lucia is one of the ships Victor just returned." Victor recovered quickly. "She is inventing another distraction 2 months ago. The Santa Lucia struck a loading arm. I inspected the repair. The interior patch behind those captains is exactly where the steel was replaced." Ruth called Pier 4 through the custom house old fire telegraph line. A dock supervisor answered from a hardwired box and confirmed that the Santa Lucia had arrived without crew. When he struck its hull with a mooring hammer, people pounded back from inside. The judge ordered the Coast Guard to board. Victor gripped the black token. "Any interference will kill them. Only if your signal reaches the ship," Elena said at her instruction. Ruth told the supervisor to pull the Santa Lucia's manual shore isolation handle. The action disconnected the vessel from Harbor Link without disabling ventilation or emergency lighting. Coast Guard officers crossed the gangway behind ballistic shields. On the hearing screens, the vessel over the tunnel began moving. Victor had triggered his contingency. "That is the empty Belladonna," Elena said. The hostage feed was relayed from Pier 4. Now the rescue boats can approach it without risking the captains. 2 Coast Guard tugs that had waited beyond the exclusion zone moved in. The Belladonna's electric harbor drives were strong enough to maneuver, not strong enough to overpower both tow lines. The vessel was pulled away from the tunnel. At Pier 4, officers opened the Santa Lucia's cargo hold. They freed the captains and arrested Pietro Vani before he could reach a service hatch. His North Star receiver remained connected to the ship's control panel. The hearing chamber erupted, but Elena raised her voice. "Do not remove that receiver until its final command is preserved." Examiner Park entered from the rear, carrying the sealed mechanical chart. The paper showed the timing pulse certificate NS4408 and the hardware token S permanent serial number. It also identified the transmitting network port inside the hearing chamber. Victor pointed toward Elena. Her credentials wrapped the command. Your own digital recorder proves it. It proves someone used my stolen identity, she replied. The mechanical chart proves which physical key sent it. The judge ordered Victor to place the token on the evidence table. He did not move. Dante rose, but Elena stopped him with a look. This reversal belonged to evidence, not force. Federal marshals removed the token from Victor's chain. Its engraved serial matched the mechanical chart. Price appeared by secure video from the hospital. She testified that she had personally logged the Caruso signing module before the transport ambush. The module presented at the hearing carried a different serial number. Internal Affairs had also recovered transfer records showing that the men who attacked her were paid through a Northstar security account funded by Meridian. At Pier 4, the seized receiver supplied the independent confirmation. Its protected memory contained the command captured at the receiving end, signed by Victor S. Token at 10:17. A second entry ordered Vanny to keep the captains hidden until Meridian obtained control, then send Dante toward the empty Belladonna. Victor's counsel argued that someone could have stolen the token. The courtroom cameras showed Victor holding it when both commands were transmitted. Price produced the final financial link. Meridian S. Escrow released its insurance payout only if Caruso Maritime entered default before noon and Victor became receiver. Payments from the same escrow had purchased the unregistered diamonds, leased the Northstar vans, and funded Vanny S. account. No single object solved the conspiracy. The tied record disproved the staged timeline. The receiver and maintenance certificate established the means. The live token command, receiving end log, camera record, and Meridian payments proved Victor S. knowing participation. The judge revoked the receivership order. Marshals cuffed Victor. His composure broke only when the 10 recovered ships sounded their horns from the harbor, one after another, under the control of their freed captains. Dante walked to the witness position. The room quieted. My complaint against Elena Marlow was false, he said. I signed it because I trusted evidence selected by a traitor and ignored the judgment of the woman who had protected my crews for years. She warned me. I humiliated her publicly, her actions saved. Pier 9, Agent Price, 11 captains, and this harbor. He turned toward Elena, his expression still restrained, but his regret no longer hidden. The failure was mine. Reporters transmitted the statement live. Port employees, who had looked away from Elena, now watched her standing alone at the center of the chamber. The judge dismissed the immediate charges against her and ordered a formal review of every record supplied by Martin Keene. Federal officers arrested Martin. Before he could leave through a side corridor, Dante approached Elena only after her cuffs were removed. You were right, he said quietly. Believing you now does not undo what I did. Her shoulder ached beneath the sling. Her reputation would not heal as quickly as a courtroom could change its ruling. No, she said. It does tea. She walked past him toward Ruth and the rescued captains, leaving Dante to understand that vindication was not forgiveness. 6 weeks later, Pier 9 reopened beneath a cold, clear sky. Victor Sloan, Martin Keene, Pietro Vanni, and the surviving Northstar contractors faced federal charges supported by records from both ends of the command system. Agent Price returned to limited duty after treatment for her concussion. The captains testified that Vanny had summoned them to a false safety meeting, drugged their coffee, and moved them through a maintenance tunnel while HarborLink looped the basin cameras. All 12 Caruso ships were recovered. The Marineress Grace required extensive decontamination, and the eastern arresting boom needed replacement, but no worker had died. Elena's name was cleared in writing. Clearing the memory of her public humiliation took longer. She returned to the Port Authority after an independent panel removed Keene and reinstated every inspection order he had suppressed. Elena accepted a new position, directing a regional maritime systems safety unit. The role gave her authority to audit automated harbor networks across New England, while formal recusal rules assigned all direct Caruso inspections to another team. Dante did not arrange the appointment. He learned about it from the public announcement. His restitution followed a different path. He paid the legal and medical costs created by his complaint without asking Elena to sign a release. He testified before the Port Commission about how Victor had exploited Caruso Maritime's private command structure. He placed the legitimate fleet under a charter requiring independent compliance review, captain representation, and a permanent analog backup for every automated safety system. Most importantly, he repeated his retraction at Pier 9 before the same workers who had heard him call Elena a smuggler. When the ceremony ended, Elena remained beside the new arresting boom controls. Her left shoulder had healed enough to abandon the sling, though physical therapy still limited how long she could lift the arm. A pale line crossed her right palm where the customs seal had cut her. Dante approached in a black suit and open-collar shirt, his tattoos visible at his neck and hands. His expression was as controlled as ever, but he stopped at a respectful distance. "The replacement boom passed inspection," he said, "because your engineers followed the specifications this time. They have developed a fear of handwritten corrections." Elena almost smiled. He held out her original waterproof notebook. Internal Affairs had recovered it from Victor's office. The faded blue band still secured the cover. "This belongs to you." She accepted it and checked the final page. Ruth's photograph of the genuine seal had been inserted beside a federal evidence stamp. "Thank you." Dante looked toward the fleet. "I spent years believing control meant never allowing anyone to question my judgment. Victor understood that weakness before I did, and when I questioned you, you punished me for it." Yes, he offered no excuse. "I cannot ask you to forget," he said. "I can only make sure I never use power that way against you again." Elena studied the man who had failed her, then stood before an entire city and named that failure as his own. Attraction had never been their problem. Trust was the difficult thing, built through choices that could be tested. "Dinner," she said. For the first time, surprise softened his eyes. She raised one finger. "Not at one of your restaurants. No guards at the next table. No gifts, no business offers, and no attempt to influence my work agreed. And if I tell you that you are wrong, I listen before I decide." Elena held out her hand. Dante took it gently, not as a command or a claim, but as an agreement between equals. Behind them, the recovered fleet sounded its horns across the harbor. Weeks earlier, its disappearance had allowed Dante to brand Elena a criminal. Its return now carried the truth everyone could hear. The woman he had rejected had not betrayed his empire. She had saved it without surrendering herself.